figure out how to walk, how to eat, how to be with goats. So he does so working in conjunction with scientists and other experts.
Can you tell us something about what he finds out? I'd love to know.
Let me tell you about how he figures out how to eat. So he participates in an autopsy, and this book has a lot of pictures and photos. And he has photos of that autopsy. So if that's going to gross you out, just skip over those pages. But he does it hands-on. He participates in the autopsy and realizes that goats have 4 guts, and they also have bacteria, protozoa, that help with the digestion of the grass that they graze on.
So like a cow chewing a cud.
Exactly. But we don't have 4. We just have the one stomach, and we don't have the right protozoa and microbes. So what he does is he fashions an extra stomach on his torso. He straps it in. He attaches a tube to it to go to his mouth, and he chews the grass. He grazes on the grass, spits it into the tube, which goes into the bag, dumps that at night into a pressure cooker, builds a little campfire, adds some hydrolyzed acid, lets it cook around. When it's done, he pours it into a cup, drinks it down. Oh. Yum, 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 that's his dinner.
I'm glad he did this so we don't have to.
Exactly.
That's dedication.
So that's Goat Man, How I Took a Holiday from Being Human by Thomas Thwaites.
Wow.
Leanne,
I don't know how I possibly can follow that, but I'm going to try. Everyone here knows that when I read for pleasure, I need a good character to intrigue me. And the book that I'm talking about today, Kelly Armstrong's City of the Lost, has a multitude of characters that do that. But most important is the main character, Casey Duncan, who is really a very strong protagonist and immediately had me envelop her, and I wanted to read more about her. She is a cop, but all the good things she does as a detective cannot erase the fact that she once killed a man before she earned her badge. I think that what she tries to do all the time is she's trying to do good. She's trying to make up for that terrible mistake that she made so early in her life. And her best friend Diana has this proclivity for getting into all sorts of problems with men especially, and she makes some very bad choices. So what Casey tries to do is she tries to make it better, and she always is interceding for her. Well, they get to a point where they're in so much trouble, they really don't have too many places to go with it. Their lives are threatened, there's no way out of the predicament they find themselves in. And they hear about this place. It's an invisible city in the Yukon called Rockton. And Rockton is totally off the grid. And they are actually allowed to go there, and they actually settle in. But Casey is very skeptical, because how can a city that's built on secrets be a safe place? Is it everything that it promises? Well, they are living off the grid. There's no mail, there's no internet, there's no telephone, there's no communication whatsoever with the outside world, and you can't go in and out unless you get permission from the town council. It's a very controlled environment. When they get to town, there's a couple of gruesome murders in a row, and they find out along the way that it isn't the first. Well, Casey becomes the sheriff's deputy. And Eric Dalton has been the sheriff for quite a while. He's a very young man, but he's lived there all his life. And he knows the town very well. And it's an odd town with odd people, obviously. But he's beginning to suspect that maybe the people there are not there for the right reasons. They're there to evade because they're being, someone's trying to get them and prosecute them. But instead, they're saying that they're the victims of crimes. And he starts to feel, this isn't what's happening. He and Casey team together and they try to figure it out. And this is what the whole premise of the book is based on. And it's fascinating. So Casey is soon plunged into the hunting of a killer in a town built on secrets. Now, Armstrong is very well known for her Otherworld series. And this is a little bit of a departure because that's all based on a female werewolf. However, this is a little bit different.
So what would you say are like the similarities and differences for people who are kind of used to her other series?
A very strong protagonist, obviously, and a female lead of sorts, because the female werewolf in the Otherworld series is the only one in the entire universe who's a female. And so she has obvious issues because of that. What Armstrong is really, really good at is building the tone and building the plot around a world, that she's developed. Obviously, she makes a good premise here that there could be a place like Rockton somewhere. You believe that this is a possibility, but you have to do it with a leap of faith. She makes the circumstances ring true. But what she also does is she builds this very isolated community, and it makes it a very eerie tone. So it's a little spooky, and that's sort of what is in common with her
So
other
it sounds
series.
like even though it isn't a specifically supernatural story, it still has
It has
the
world
atmosphere
building.
makes you feel
Absolutely.
The
So
world
that-
building.
Yes, and the world building. So it's the combination thereof. So she does a really good job of that.
Is there a lot of violence on the page?
It's no gratuitous violence. A lot of times what you're finding is the actual bodies, and she spares it's a graphic description, but it isn't over the board. I mean, it really, she explains what happens, and it all plays into the plot. So she's not, but you don't actually, I have to tell you what was scarier than the violence, and I have a pretty high tolerance for that, is the tone. Because it's spooky, and that might bother people more because it's a little bit bridging on horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really a blood-soaked locked room mystery on steroids. That's how I like to describe it. And you should be prepared for an all-nighter to finish it. And I'm personally really excited because her second book in the series is coming out the 7th of February, and it's called A Darkness Absolute.
That's exciting.
Yes. So Karen, why don't you tell us about another graphic novel?
Okay. The next book that I'm going to talk about is a beautiful book by the actor and the author Ethan Hawke, whose name you will all recognize, and the illustrator Greg Ruth. And it's called Inda, A Story of the Apache Wars. The author created, this is a piece of historical fiction, but they created it to kind of redress an imbalance in the standard telling that we all got in school of or maybe didn't get at all, of the Apache Wars. You've all heard, the names of Cochise and Geronimo, but you might be a little vague on the details, and kind of mostly what people think about the Apaches is, they're those really violent bad guys in the Old West movies. That's the general thought. So Inda, which is this beautifully illustrated in sepia-toned ink drawings, is trying to tell the story from the inside of a people whose very existence is threatened and what that does to them. You can see we've got some illustrations here of this is a cover photo, and you can see some of the detail and also the violence that is expressed in this. Obviously, it's going to have violence, and then a sort of a comic book style that is more frames to tell the actual story. You get a mixture of this sort of the frames and then full page drawings as well. As Hawke says in the afterword to the book, he felt that this was a story that needed to be told again and again until the names of Geronimo and Cochise are as familiar to young American ears as Washington and Lincoln. I knew, he says, that it was not really my story to tell, but my heart felt compelled to tell it. So obviously this is a great one for history buffs, especially buffs, people who love the American West. And it even has a bibliography for further reading because, as most of the reviewers who read this said, it's a book that just makes you want to know more about all of this. So this is Inda, A Story of the Apache Wars by Hawke and Ruth.
And a really great example of how graphic novels can tackle very serious subjects.
Yes, absolutely. All righty. So next, we have Jackie again, I believe.
Okay, more nonfiction. So my second book today is called Presence, Bringing Your Boldest Self to Your Biggest Challenges by Amy Cuddy. And she is a Harvard professor and social psychologist. And she, with my first book, this was also a TED Talk. This was actually, at the time of me writing this, the second most watched TED Talk ever. So 27 million people saw it, so just a few. Just a few, yeah.
Few more than watch this broadcast.
And it's popular for a reason. Literally everyone on the planet can find an application for her techniques. So, but I think it's important to back up and explain what she means by presence. What she says is, presence, as I mean it throughout these pages, is the state of feeling connected with our own thoughts, values, abilities, and emotions, so that we can better connect with the thoughts, values, abilities, and emotions of others. It's kind of a mouthful. What she's saying here is she's talking about presence in the sense of being in the moment, not in the sense of when you would say someone has presence, like she came in and sort of took over the room with her aura. But it's really talking about being in the moment. It's very much in keeping with this sort of trendy idea of mindfulness right now. Everybody's kind of, not looking ahead, not looking back, but really being in the moment. So that's what she means there. And there's a lot that goes into achieving that. It's harder than it sounds. But she does a really remarkable job of breaking down how you can achieve that. And she draws heavily on her own experiences, which is part of what makes this really interesting. She was in a horrific car accident when she was in college and suffered a traumatic brain injury to the point where they didn't know if she was ever going to be able to finish college. And she obviously went on to get a doctorate. She teaches at Harvard, so she's done okay. But she also draws on the stories of just regular people going about their lives and facing their own challenges. So she talks about how you can employ these really simple techniques and they can have a really big impact on. And she's teaching you how to essentially act from a place of authenticity, ultimately from a place of personal power instead of fear. So her most well-known technique, which I love, is adopting a power position before you go into a challenging situation, be that a job interview or a presentation, or, I don't know, being on WCAT. So I will actually demonstrate this. This is called the Wonder Woman, or the starfish. And studies have shown that adopting this position for a few minutes, either by yourself or while looking in a mirror, or as we did it before in a group, really opens you up to the world and in turn opens others up to you. And there's a lot of variations on this. And they've actually proven that just envisioning yourself in this position can really be helpful. They did a study with quadriplegic people who actually physically can't get into this position. And they pictured themselves doing it and really found that it still made a difference just in their minds. So like other books on my list, Perspective is really about giving the reader a new, Presence rather, is about giving readers a new perspective. It's a different way of thinking about your relationship between your mind and your body. And honestly, just reading this book made me feel more confident and a little bit more in control. I did the starfish before this talk, as we all did. So really, it's truly worth the read, I think. Just like Grit, everybody can find an application for it in their lives.
Well, that's actually going to be my question for you. I mean, when I look at something like that, I'll think, well, that might be applicable to someone who's a little younger than I am, who's had different life experiences. So would you say that this would appeal to a variety of people?
It would. I think if you were, say, dealing with a parent who was ill and in the hospital, and you had to act as their advocate, and you were talking to the doctors, a lot of people might feel like they're not in the position of power. In that case, the doctor's really in control. So you might do this before you have to have an important talk with the doctor, so that you feel like you're, bringing your best self and you're asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And it's not really about improving your performance so much as feeling as if you did your best and you can walk away being satisfied.
And again,
with
authenticity is so important.
Authenticity.
No,
Yeah, so I really think everyone can find a place for it. Everyone's going to interview for a job at some point, probably. So.
Oh, yes, that's true. Thank you.
All right. So again, that was Amy Cuddy's Presence, bringing your boldest self to your biggest challenges. And I think we're back to Jeff.
We are. My second book is another one that I reread, childhood favorite, from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler.
My favorite.
By E.L. Königsberg. It was published in 1967, and like A Wrinkle in Time, it also won the Newbery Award. And in fact, even more so than that, it is still ranked. It is ranked on many best of lists of the 20th century as one of the most popular and beloved children's books of the entire 20th century. And I was surprised how much. It's from the 60s. It has a feel of that. There's a certain datedness to it. But I was amazed at how rereading it as an adult, it really had just as much impact as it did when I read it as a child. As with many books like this for kids, one of the key aspects of it is that it's based on child protagonists who go off on some kind of adventure without adults to guide them, because that helps them to make their own choices, make their own mistakes and learn along the way. Claudia Kincaid, who, like Meg in Wrinkle in Time, is about 13 years old, and she also is a bit of a misfit. She feels very underappreciated by her family. She lives in suburban Greenwich, Connecticut, and she decides to run away. So she goes through an elaborate plan of figuring out how this, she's very methodical. How is she going to do this?
Like Goatman.
Like Goatman, yes. And one thing that she decides, which turns out to be a very good idea, is to enlist her brother, her younger brother Jamie, who probably the main thing he brings to this is that he's been diligently saving his allowance for quite some time and has amassed the revenue that they can use to go off and manage this project. But more importantly, one of the things that she really thinks about is she doesn't really just want to run away. She wants to run to something, which I think is actually a pretty self-aware thing for a child her age to do. And so she decides that they're going to run to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. So they do. They take their money and their plans and they go off to New York and they spend the day in the museum, and then when it closes down at night, they sleep in the museum. They sleep in a giant bed in one of the historic furniture displays. They bathe in the, I don't know if any of you remember the museum, but there's a big restaurant that